Hello, everyone. Beneath the calm waves of Vladivostok, something terrifying sleeps. Locals call it the Submarine Cemetery, a hidden graveyard of Soviet nuclear submarines, abandoned after the Cold War and left to rot beneath the sea. For decades, no one knew what truly lurked down there, until experts finally uncovered the truth. What they found was far worse than anyone imagined. Rusting reactors, radioactive leaks, and a silent disaster waiting to unfold. This isn't history. It's a ticking time bomb beneath the waves. During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union built one of the largest submarine fleets in history. Hundreds of nuclear-powered vessels patrolled the world's oceans, each capable of carrying weapons strong enough to destroy entire cities. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Navy controlled a vast underwater armada, stretching from the Arctic to the Pacific. Shipyards from Murmansk to Vladivostok were churning out submarines at an astonishing rate. The pride of this fleet was the colossal Typhoon-class submarine, over 170 meters long and armed with 20 nuclear missiles. These underwater giants symbolized Soviet power. But they also created a future problem no one was ready to face. When these submarines reached the end of their service life, they couldn't simply be scrapped like old ships. Each one carried a nuclear reactor, and dismantling it safely required immense time, expertise, and money. But the Soviet military machine was moving too fast to slow down. As newer submarines were built, the old ones were quietly anchored in shallow bays, stripped of their valuable parts, and left to rust. In Vladivostok, these abandoned hulls began to gather in one area, forming what locals soon started calling the Submarine Cemetery. To outsiders, it looked like a cluster of decaying steel. But to those who understood what was inside, it was a ticking time bomb. Every submarine in that graveyard had once been powered by a nuclear reactor, and many still held their radioactive cores. Deactivating them safely meant removing the spent fuel, sealing off contaminated sections, and storing them in secure facilities. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia inherited hundreds of these nuclear vessels and had almost no resources left to dismantle them properly. The economy was crumbling, shipyards were underfunded, and technical crews were leaving in droves. The result was a nightmare. Dozens of nuclear submarines tied to docks, half submerged and forgotten, their reactors still loaded with radioactive material. To understand how dangerous this situation truly is, we need to go back to August 1985, when Chazma Bay, not far from Vladivostok, became the site of one of the worst nuclear accidents in naval history. That summer, technicians were refueling a submarine of the Pacific Fleet. Refueling was always a delicate process. One mistake could be catastrophic. And that's exactly what happened. A series of technical errors triggered an uncontrolled chain reaction inside the submarine's reactor. The result was a massive thermal explosion that tore through the vessel. The blast blew the reactor lid into the sky, scattering radioactive debris and releasing a column of radioactive steam over the bay. 10 people died instantly. Dozens more suffered severe burns and radiation poisoning. The Soviet government immediately sealed off the area and ordered total secrecy. Families of the victims were told only vague details. For years, the true scale of the Chazma Bay disaster was buried under classified reports. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed did the truth emerge. Radiation monitoring revealed that soil and seabed samples near the bay still contained dangerous levels of cesium and strontium. Decades later, the contamination remains measurable. The explosion became a chilling warning, proof of how even a single mistake in handling nuclear materials could have consequences lasting generations. After 1991, Russia faced an overwhelming challenge. More than 180 nuclear submarines needed to be dismantled, each containing reactors and radioactive fuel. Defueling one vessel could take months, and cutting apart its reactor safely could take years. But Russia's shipyards, especially those near Vladivostok, were ill-equipped to handle the sheer scale of the task. Many submarines were cut open and partially dismantled, then left floating in bays with their reactors still inside. Others were stripped of valuable components and simply abandoned. With the economy in ruins, there was no money to finish the job. Environmental groups like Greenpeace and the Bologna Foundation began documenting what was happening. They published images of rusting conning towers, half-sunk hulls, and corroded steel lying in shallow water. Their reports sparked international concern. Eventually, the world stepped in. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, countries like the United States, Japan, and Norway partnered with Russia through the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. They provided funding, expertise, and technology to help dismantle and defuel dozens of submarines. It was a massive operation. And yet, even after years of effort, hundreds of vessels still remained. Then came the discovery that shocked everyone. Independent researchers began mapping the waters near Vladivostok and finally confirmed what many suspected. Dozens of submarines, some half-submerged, were clustered together in shallow water. Many still contained their nuclear reactor compartments, and in some cases, spent fuel assemblies had never been removed. The assumption had always been that these submarines had been safely defueled before being abandoned. The surveys showed otherwise. Even worse, some of the submarines weren't listed in any official records. They had simply vanished from paperwork, their locations unknown until experts physically found them decades later. The truth was staggering. These weren't just relics of the past, they were active environmental hazards. Experts called them living risks, warning that corrosion, leakage, and storms could trigger radioactive contamination at any time. Unlike reactors stored in controlled facilities, these decaying hulks were exposed to open seawater. If even one reactor compartment ruptured, radioactive isotopes could spread directly into the Sea of Japan, contaminating the marine ecosystem that millions depend on. Vladivostok's fishing industry, a lifeline for the region, would be devastated, and the contamination wouldn't stop at Russia's borders. When reports of the submarine graveyard finally surfaced, the government could no longer remain silent. Radiation monitoring teams were dispatched along the coast, setting up checkpoints near villages and fishing docks. Early readings showed elevated radiation levels in both sediment and seawater. Officials tried to reassure the public, claiming there was no immediate danger. But independent environmental groups quickly challenged that narrative. Their surveys found traces of contamination in seafood samples taken near the submarine sites. The evidence was undeniable. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. People were already living and working in contact with contaminated waters. The international community reacted with alarm. Experts warned that without urgent cleanup, the Vladivostok region could face a long-term ecological disaster. Inside Moscow, political debate erupted. Some officials dismissed the reports as exaggerations meant to damage Russia's image. Others argued that doing nothing would be far costlier, not just in money, but in lives and credibility. Regional leaders begged for federal support, transfer of all reactor compartments to secure long-term storage, and full transparency with international monitoring. Independent observers stress that secrecy only breeds mistrust. People need data, proof, and action, not vague reassurances. And the world needs cooperation, not politics. Radiation doesn't respect borders. If the contamination from Vladivostok spreads through the Pacific currents, its effects could reach far beyond Russia's coastline. The Vladivostok submarine graveyard isn't just a relic of the past. It's a warning for the future. Beneath those calm Pacific waves lies a legacy of steel, uranium, and human neglect. The Cold War may have ended, but its ghosts still whisper beneath the deep. Because some secrets never die. They just rust in silence. If this story shocked you, like, share, and subscribe for more untold truths beneath the surface. Thanks for watching.